back.
Moving on to the West. Hey, you can't really do like the way it was for, for the East. You know pretty much for a fact unless an injury occurs.
Some teams are trying to lose.
Chicago, Indiana.
Yeah, and some teams are trying to lose, so you don't have to worry about them.
But on the West, it's San Antonio could be number one. Oklahoma City could be one. Clippers could even be one.
I'm taking San Antonio. Look, Gary Neal.
I'm taking Oklahoma City was one last
Speaking
year.
of Gary Neal, we weren't speaking of Gary Neal. Kawhi Leonard though, he was I forget which preseason game, but in a certain preseason game, I think he had like 20 and like 15 or something like that. Like, I think he's set for a really good year. I think. Like fantasy, like we're gonna do a fantasy basketball thing, and I think if I can get him, I'm gonna try to get him just because
Could he win Most Improved?
Possibly win Most Improved. The only problem is that people kind of saw him last year, but yeah, I mean, if he has a good season, I think he's one of the favorites to win that award because you compare his regular season last year with his regular season this year. You know, you can throw in the playoffs, and that might change someone's vote. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's a pretty difficult. Anthony Davis could win it too. Because he was injured a lot last year, but people think he might have a 20-10 season, which I'd be rooting for.
I don't know.
Or Eric Gordon, speaking on that same team, like he had didn't he already win it? I think he might have already won it once. He might have won it.
He did. I mean, that goes back to once we get to the bottom, like Oklahoma City, San Antonio, Clippers, probably the top three.
Yeah,
Golden State up there.
I would put Golden State in the top. I would make it.
So they're top four.
I would make it like I could see Golden State having a better record than the Clippers or a better record than the Spurs or something like that.
But if I were to pick, I'd still think Oklahoma City would be number one. They did lose a couple of key assets, but I think when Westbrook comes back with Durant, they'll be just as good as they were before.
I'm not really a huge fan of that team following the Harden trade, and obviously with Russell Westbrook not playing, he might miss the first month of the season or whatever.
Right.
So I wasn't unless Jeremy Lamb comes in really big. I just don't see them replicating production at the shooting guard. I mean, Reggie Jackson could do it, but I think that they've kind of gone really like cost effective, and it turns out that you can't really play that way.
Houston. We should include them. It's top five. Because Houston could be number one too.
Yeah, maybe.
You don't really know what's going to happen.
I think of all of the stars that changed teams over the past 2 or 3 years.
I think Houston has the best chance because, like you said, Westbrook will be out for the first month.
Right. But like I said, and you look back at all the stars who've changed teams, I think that the Houston situation is probably the best for Dwight. As like a lot of teams needed some guys that come together and figure stuff out, and I think because it's just Dwight over there. I mean, James Harden.
Well, until they get rid of Omer.
Even
they can talk about how they're going to make it work, him and Omer. That's not
even that. No, I mean, they're just saying that to save face and trade value, which is fine. But I just think that team with the playing styles and the assets and the pieces they have around those two stars, which, by the way, we should talk about this really quickly, since we're just going all around. James Harden got number 4 in the NBA player rank, ESPN's NBA player rank, which I just think is completely wrong.
I agree. I think James Harden's overrated.
I don't think he's overrated, unless
people think he's like the best shooting guard in the league.
I think that ESPN overrated him. ESPN definitely overrated him, but I don't think that I think I've got a fairly good rating in my head about how good he is. I mean, he's a good player. You take him, and he's a top 20 player, but he's not a top 5 player. Just because he gets to the line a lot, but really, he shot like 43% or something like that. I mean, he's just a volume scorer at this point. He hasn't shown anything more in that season than Kevin Martin did back in his was he in Sacramento for those years. Mm-hmm. Just a guy who can score on a team that made the 8th seed. Like, we're really gonna go for a guy like that. Look, I'm not saying he's a bad player. I like James Harden. I think he's got a crafty skill set, but I think that a few years ago, Manu Ginobili had very similar numbers to him. And Manu Ginobili wasn't ranked top 5. I mean, if you played Manu more, they always played
Manu
Manu
averaged 25 points a game.
They always played, well, he got pretty close, I would say, in a couple seasons.
He averaged 20. But he never played as much minutes.
Right. He would only play about 29, 30, 32 minutes. And Harden plays 40 minutes if he can. He plays basically every minute of the game. So I would say I think that we're going to look back at this next year, and he's going to be 18th or something because he had a not so productive season, or at least his expectations were too high. And so that's why I would say, James Harden's not that good.
I agree.
And they haven't
but
placed.
Houston is still a good team.
They haven't placed higher than Russell Westbrook. Now,
I mean, I would take Carmelo over.
Yeah.
People knock on Melo for
Where did
not
Carmelo
playing
end
defense.
up?
First of all, I would rather Harden doesn't play any defense either. And if
No.
I'm taking one of them, I'm taking a 6'8", bulkier guy rather than James Harden.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at scoring, Carmelo is still one of the best scorers, and that's all that really James Harden can do. I mean, I would say probably James Harden maybe a little bit better of a playmaker, but he's just on he's got a different skill set, and he's not as good of a rebounder. He's not as good of a, I mean, honestly, defensively.
Carmelo's a very underrated offensive rebounder.
Oh yeah, he's probably in the top 5. He's probably number 1 at the small forward. I mean, him or LeBron
It's gotta
probably
be
is
him.
pretty
I don't
good.
think I've ever seen anyone tip and miss shots.
Kawhi actually is probably pretty good, so I would say between those two. Anyway, we didn't really finish, but when we come back, we'll finish up the West and maybe give out our MVP finals predictions and all that stuff. So stick around.